Foundation is a big idea sci-fi novel. It was written in 1951 by Isaac Asimov, and it asks a fascinating question. Can you predict the rise and fall of civilization? And if you can you prevent the fall? Today we're talking about Foundation. Welcome to the Book Lab. Hi and welcome to the Book Lab. I'm Björn, and today we're going to talk about Foundation and why it matters if you want to understand human nature and the rise and fall of civilization. The story begins with Harry Seldon, a mathematician that developed a science called Psychohistory, and the idea is wild. You know, you can't predict what one single person will do, but if you have billions of people, individual randomness starts to disappear into statistics. The idea is that with enough data, you can predict what an entire civilization might be heading. And Sheldon, he does this, and he has this horrible revelation about the future. The galactic empire is going to collapse, not in 1,000 years, but very soon. After it falls, humanity stands before 30,000 years of darkness. Think the Middle Ages. But Sheldon believes that he can reduce that to just 1,000 years. And this is where the story really begins. Sheldon sends around 100,000 people to Terminus, a remote planet at the edge of the galaxy, supposedly to create Encyclopedia Galactica, a giant collection of all human knowledge. The idea is that when civilization collapses, science shouldn't disappear with it. If we now prepare a giant summary of all knowledge, it will never be lost. Coming generations will build on it and will not have to rediscover it for themselves. 1 millennium will do the work of 30,000. The knowledge of an entire species is simply too much for one person to absorb. It has to be collected, organized, and passed on. But here's the interesting part. The encyclopedia isn't actually the main point, and minor spoiler here, it's a cover story. Sheldon's real plan is to create a foundation that can preserve civilization and eventually rebuild the empire after the collapse. If people know that this is going to happen, they're going to change their behavior. That's why Sheldon keeps it all a secret. He doesn't tell the Foundation exactly what's going to happen. Instead, he stages a few crises that are supposed to nudge the Foundation to go down his calculated path. These crises become known as Seldon crises. So that's a pretty cool story, and the universe that Asimov has built is vast, and each part of the book is probably decades apart for each part of the book, and probably light years away. This makes the world feel so vast and so epic, and it's one of the reasons I like this book so much. One key lesson from this book is how institutions can become their own worst enemy. In the book, Seldon knows that the empire can't be saved. Quote, "The fall of empire, gentlemen, is a massive thing, however, and it's not easily fought." And Sheldon's diagnosis is brutal. Quote, "A rise of bureaucracy, a reversing of initiative, a freezing of caste, a damning of curiosity." The last quote really struck a chord with me and is one of my main takeaways from this book. A civilization might not collapse because it has become weak. It collapses because it becomes incapable of changing. The empire has become so enormous, so bureaucratic, and so comfortable that it has lost its ability to adapt. Quote, "Interstellar trade will decay, population will decline, the empire will simply stop working. And nobody at the center seems capable or interested in doing anything about it." This reminds me a little bit of what I see in Europe right now. Bureaucracy is deep. People are very set in their ways, and the expectations is that the future will be like the past. And I think that might be a future lesson that we will learn from. And the same thing happens with the encyclopedist, the guys writing the encyclopedia, I can't say that word, in this book. They become so obsessed with their mission that they fail to see the world changing around them. They're supposed to preserve civilization, but instead they're too busy writing about civilization to actually defend it. Institutions can preserve old knowledge, but they can also preserve old assumptions. And once institutions become more concerned with following procedure than actually adopting to a new reality, it starts to become a liability. One thing that I really liked about Foundation is how the Foundation itself uses soft power rather than just brute force and overwhelming violence to tame the universe around them. First of all, they use technology. They have superior technology to everyone else in the universe. Then it turns that technology into religion, because for the barbarians on the other planet, their technology is basically indistinguishable from magic. The Foundation uses that belief to influence them. And then, when religion fades, they turn to use trade as a mechanism for influence. The Foundation makes the other planets dependent on their technology. And once you have that in place, then you simply don't need to invade anyone. I found this fascinating because Asimov is basically showing different forms of power evolving. And if you ever played a game like Civilization, you know Sid Meier's famous strategy game, then you know there's several winning conditions in that game. Of course, it's a military victory, but there's also technology victory, a cultural, religious, whatever it could contain, victory, or you can have economic victory. The lesson is that as civilization progresses, the mechanisms of influences also changes. Another key takeaway, but it's a smaller idea, but it really resonated with me because I can recognize this pattern in my own life, and it's how constraints fuel innovation and creativity. The encyclopedists at the Terminus planet, they are very low on important resources like metals, and that forces them to be very smart with how they use their limited resources. So they eventually are able to develop these really tiny but powerful technologies. Tiny because they can't use too much metal, but that also makes them very powerful throughout the galaxy. And I recognize this from my own work as a game developer, where we're always constrained by what the hardware on the consoles can do, right? We have only so much memory, so much processing power, so much disk space. And over again, I've worked in games for 16 years. There are things that we deem as impossible at the beginning of a hardware cycle that we can actually pull off, often beyond any expectations, something that feels totally magical that we would not think that we could do given the restrictions, but it actually happens because the restrictions makes us think harder, be more innovative and creative. So restrictions are not just something to be annoyed with, it's actually a key to new innovations. So what's the verdict of this first book in the Foundation series? No, I forgot to say it's a series. This is the first book. It was actually originally just short stories that then got compiled into this book and tied together a little bit more. And now it's a classic. And classics are classics for a reason. This book is not really about spaceships and futuristic technology and alien races. It's a book about civilization. This is why I think reading classics is so valuable. A great classic doesn't just tell you something about the time in which it was written, it gives you a model for thinking about problems that keep appearing throughout history. Foundation is ultimately asking, what makes a civilization resilient? Is it knowledge? Is it trade? Is it technology? Is it the ability to adapt? Or the individual who know that the old rules no longer apply? And perhaps the most uncomfortable lesson from this book is that civilizations don't necessarily fail because people are stupid. They can fall because intelligent people get stuck inside a system that is no longer valid and no longer works. That's what makes Foundation special. We are currently living through a technological boom. I talk about it all the time, and I've kind of pivoted Book Club towards talking about AI, disruptive technology, because it shapes so much of our current life, but also the trajectory of the future. And Asimov's warning is simple. The future belongs to the civilizations that can adapt faster than things change. So if you want to understand how civilization works, and if you like classic fiction that can actually teach you something about human nature, society, civilization, the big questions, then this book is probably right up your alley. I truly recommend it. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know I talked about iRobot, not recently. I've been reading a lot of sci-fi classics recently because life has become so much more like sci-fi. The the recent days. I did not. This was not a home run for me. So if you're interested in reading Asimov, then pick Foundation to start with. I think this one is a much better book, and I would say it's mandatory reading if you're interested in the rise and fall of civilization and the preservation of human knowledge. This book actually is tied to what I'm thinking about as for next year's reading list theme. Whoops, my camera ran out of memory, but let's continue on. Yeah, this book inspired my upcoming reading list for next year. I usually have a theme for it. Last year it was how to prepare yourself for the singularity and the technical disruption of AI. That's been the theme for this year, and understanding also scientific revolutions and how they come about and the mechanics behind it. Next year I'm thinking about having the theme of the building blocks of civilization. What did it take to build the civilization that we lived in? The railroads, the Wright brothers inventing aviation, something that influenced so many things for how we travel, move around, and also how we fight wars, right? Electricity and building out the grid, because we are in this phase of building the next kind of stage of civilization. We're building out our intelligence grid, you can say. So books like Energy and Civilization by Václav Smil is going to be very helpful to understand what's going on now. So that's just a little peek of what might happen in 2027. Let me know if you read any Asimov books and which one of them I should continue with next. I think I will continue with this series because I'm quite invested in it. I haven't watched the TV series. Let me know if that is any good. And let me know what you're reading in the comments. As always, subscribe to the newsletter to get book recommendations, get the new nonfiction releases before everyone else, and get hidden gems from a vast library of nonfiction books that I've read. I send it out every week, so please sign up for that. And see you next week with more book reviews. Then I'm going to talk about the month of September. An insane lineup of nonfiction books are being released. So I'm going to do that curated list of the best releases for September next week. Until then, Björn out.